You're listening to Podcasters of Podcasting, a monthly resource podcast where we will be sharing tips and tricks and actionable advice for podcasters and the pod curious. I'm your host, Nathan Peavey, and I'm joined here today by...
Hi, it's me. I'm Nikolai.
Hey, Nikolai. Nikolai is a burnout coach, which I think is unbelievably relevant to anybody, especially in podcasting.
Mhm.
Podcasting is... I mean, I don't want to say it's a nightmare come episode 1. We're not going to tell you, oh, this is misery, but like it takes a lot of consistency and it takes a lot of dedication. So burnout, at least I can say in my own personal experience, can be a serious problem for any kind of dedicated, ongoing artistic endeavor, such as podcasting. Just to kind of kick things off, since Nikolai, you're the expert, what is burnout? Open up that Wikipedia.
Okay, let's just jump right into it. So burnout is basically a chronic stress response. It's something that happens to us when we're just really, burning the candle at both ends, as they say. We're doing a lot, and our minds and bodies maybe are just feeling overloaded and don't know what to do with it. The sort of clinical indicators of burnout, because I'm also a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Rhode Island and New Hampshire now as of last month.
Skipped over Massachusetts.
I'm getting there, actually. I'll be hopefully licensed in Massachusetts by the end of this year. But the clinical sort of indicators of like, oh no, are you officially burned out? There's 3 things that you want to watch for. One is just emotional exhaustion, which honestly, when I talk to people about burnout, a lot of people are like, oh no, that's me. Emotional exhaustion, basically feeling a little bit like detached. So maybe you're feeling a little bit more hopeless, not as excited. You kind of feel like you should be doing things, but then you catch yourself not doing them, maybe thinking, what's the point? Like, why did I start this thing? I'm just feeling a little bit like removed, not as passionate, connected, excited. And then the last indicator that you are officially burnt out, like clinically, is just a decreased sense of productivity, So I had planned to have this many episodes recorded or edited by the end of the month, and I'm binge watching Netflix instead. Or I'm productively procrastinating by deciding, you know what, I should reorganize every file on my computer so it's like really neat, but...
So that I can start working.
Exactly. And I feel like I'm doing something, but then also I have nothing to show for it in terms of, feeling like I accomplished something in line with my goals.
Sure. I'm really interested to know, where does that sense of burnout come from? Because often it'll strike me during periods where I don't necessarily feel that I'm burning the candle on both ends, where maybe I'm not at my most productive. And then I'm like, oh, I need to start. And starting is just such an obstacle. And, I'm sort of wondering if one can become burnt out just by sort of the prospect of starting.
I think burnout is...
Or is it a little bit more of a general term?
Well, I think it's a cognitive process or a mental process as much as it is like the act of actually doing something. I think you can get burnt out by spending an awful lot of time thinking about what you should be doing. I think that's why a lot of creative people maybe burn out. It's not always necessarily the doing that gets them burnt out. It's the creative process. And the stuff that's going on inside your head that maybe you can't always see it, but that takes effort, thinking takes effort, planning takes effort, creativity, I think it can take effort to make space for that or access it. Or for a lot of creatives, I hear, because I definitely have a subset of my own clients who are creatives. I think the realities of modern life and having jobs and bills to pay and having to pivot your brain from daily life working mode to then creative mode, that shifting constantly, I think that can burn you out too,
Yeah, absolutely. I can say as an entrepreneur, between the freelance work that I do on the side and just like shifting into kind of ideating business mode, like you're doing so much internal work. You're doing so much work while you're just sitting on the couch and you're not getting paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be it can just be such a headache in that way to like be in that place kind of all the time. There's no, I can only speak as a business, as an entrepreneur, but just being in kind of that headspace of being like always on, and it can be very hard to set boundaries around that time and space. I mean, that brings us to a pretty obvious next question. Like, what do you do about it?
Yeah, I think, so as I shared, I'm a burnout coach, but I'm also a licensed mental health counselor. So I have my own private practice that I operate, and I'm a complete solo practitioner. So that part about entrepreneurship, I think, really resonates. And I have a lot of clients who are entrepreneurs as well. And I think sometimes the struggle when you're either if you're in an entrepreneurial endeavor, you are an entrepreneur, or you're working full time and you're striving to become an entrepreneur and step into that world full time.
And just if I can interrupt, I mean, as I think sort of words of encouragement for anybody listening, like creative endeavors are entrepreneurial as well. Like,
Yeah.
Even if you're just running a podcast for like purely for your own edification, like you are absolutely an entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
You are doing the things that an entrepreneur does to market, to sell yourself, to produce a product, even if you don't even necessarily want to be producing this product for money, like you are making a product and shipping it to market.
And it's yours.
Yeah.
And you're the one like who's really like taking accountability for it, right? And spearheading it and wearing all the hats, as they say, all of them. So I agree. And I think the struggle is when you're in any sort of entrepreneurship endeavor, right? And creative endeavors included in that. We don't have boundaries created for us the way a lot of people do in like traditional 9-to-5 jobs. And that's part of the struggle. I think we have to learn to create them ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, what are some strategies that people can use to either prevent it from happening in the first place or to overcome it? I feel like the pretty obvious answer to preventing it from happening is just kind of setting those boundaries and being really, really vigilant about those. But speaking from personal experience, I can very comfortably say that it is unbelievably hard to do that, and you're not going to succeed all the time. So like, I feel like to some extent it's gonna creep in no matter what you do. So like, it's crept in, it's here. What do I do?
Yeah, I would say a plug for boundaries for certain. And just like a little bit of data. The World Health Organization published something a couple of years ago that basically said working 55 hours or more is officially hazardous to your health. That's sort of the earmarker that they use. So I would encourage anyone to really look at how many hours they are putting in. And that includes your full-time job if you also have a full-time job. See what you can do to like really try and make it work in that 55-hour or less mark. So if you work 40 hours per week, then I would say like really try to keep your sort of podcasting entrepreneurial work to 15. And I personally think that's kind of where boundaries come into play, is figuring out like what problem solving can happen to either really get super intentional with leveraging your time, delegating to like technology or other people wherever possible, like try and work within those constraints. And if you really can't, because I worked full time when I was starting my private practice, and I negotiated a situation where I got to do my 40 hours in 4 days. So I worked 4 10s instead of 5 8s. But then I worked, on my day off and on Saturdays, but only a half day on Saturday. So I'd at least
So
get
it's totally
1.5
fine, yeah.
days up. So I mean, I probably violated my own rule. But I did that for about a year before I fully sort of pursued my own practice. And I think also thinking about if you're going to work way more hours, see what you can do to have like a strategy to get out of that sort of habit as quickly as possible. Like a year, I think is doable, but know that I guess go into it knowing that it's like potentially hurting your health. Make a conscious decision that you're aware that's happening and figure out like, what can I do to scale this back over time?
I'm really intrigued by what you said about leveraging people around you, leveraging technology. Just as like the burnout expert, what do you have any kind of specific tools you would recommend? Because I think for my own part, like something that's kind of almost perhaps alarm bells isn't the right word, but just making me like, oh dear, when I hear it is like the 55-hour limit, because to some extent we're kind of saying like, oh, if you run your own business, if you're a lawyer, if you're a doctor, like, sorry, you don't get to have creative endeavor.
I mean, I think that points to why there's so many people burnt out in our society right now, because I would argue that a lot of those people are putting in a lot of hours and there's a reason that physicians are, for example, like, and lawyers are on the list of professions that are most likely to burn out and have like real serious consequences as a result of that. I don't think it means, okay, so here's what I'll say about that. It doesn't mean that you can't do the things you love. I think you have to be mindful of just like what your mindset is and how those things are making you feel. And especially if you're in a job like that where you're already putting in like 60 hours a week, which I would argue, according to the World Health Organization, is already not good for your health, that your podcasting better damn well be like as fun as it can be. And it needs to be something that's filling your cup as much as possible. And so maybe thinking about if you have a podcast and you're feeling like it's really draining you, maybe you need to take a step back and think about like, what can I do to kind of like shake it up or just like make it feel vibrant again for me? Do I need to like bring in some new content? Do I maybe need to think about like a format change? Do I just need to do something like a really wonky episode? But maybe you need to like reconnect with the fun, because I think when we think about not working, in theory, 55 hours a week, that doesn't mean we have to be doing nothing.
Sure.
It just means we have to be doing something that like cognitively gives us a break. And that's different for each of us. Like some people get a break cleaning their house. I wish I was one of those people. But like that can be rest for some people. And if you love it, right, then you can like work a bunch of hours and then go home and clean your house and feel great about it. But for some people, that would feel like more work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really do want to, I guess I don't really have more to add, but I love using the term of like, make sure that what you're doing is filling your cup. Like find the fun. If this is making you miserable, you don't have to keep going.
No, like you chose this.
Yeah. It's like, and with be it podcasting, be it writing the book you've been working on, like if it's making you miserable, you can just stop. One of the best pieces of advice I've ever heard in my life was from comedian Paul F. Tompkins, who said, "You can leave the party anytime you want to." You don't have to justify your decisions. You don't have to do any of this stuff unless you have to be there or you'll lose your job. Like you can just cut it out.
Yeah, and totally. I've had parties and at my own house, and I leave my own party and I say, "Bye guys, I'm going to bed." Everybody in my life knows Nikolai's super fun, and she goes to bed at 9 p.m. If you're still at my house after 9 p.m., you can stay, but I'll be sleeping.
Oh, yeah, I'm right there with you. If I don't get a solid 18 hours a night, I'm useless.
Oh, my God, for real.
So I guess that kind of brings me to another thread that I kind of wanted to pull with you a little bit. For my own part, any kind of creative endeavor that I do, I am so dependent on momentum. I'm one of those people, if I start something and I stop, I'm not going to pick it up again. And in line with everything you're saying, if you're feeling burnt out, if you're feeling like your cup's not being filled, then you can just stop. And that's terrific advice. But what would you say to somebody who doesn't want to lose it, who doesn't want to lose where they're at?
Yeah, I would say, there are times always for all of us where it just makes more sense to kind of go with it. Or even, quite frankly, sometimes even push through,
Mhm.
there are times where maybe we're working on something and maybe we're doing something that's really hard or it's really boring and we hate it. And we're like, I can't stop because I will never, ever, ever come back to this. So there's always a time for pushing through. I think it's not about viewing, taking a break as this really
As a failure.
binary thing. Yeah, or failure. It's just know that you got to take a break sometime. We're not robots, people, right? So if you're going to
Absolutely.
push through and for whatever reason, I have a lot of momentum and I'm going to hit this project until 3:00 in the morning and work really hard, then maybe know that the next day you have to maybe phone some things in, as they say, do a good enough job. Some of my clients call it be a C student. It's okay to be a C student. Sometimes it means actually you're average, and doing an average job is not necessarily the end of the world, especially if the day before or the week before or the month before you were the A+ student and you were really, really driving forward with something.
Sure. And I think a terrific piece of advice that I've heard, honestly, in the context of mental health in general, but I've really tried to apply it to the rest of my life, is that anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Just as I said, it was in the context of mental health. We're talking about people who maybe you're so depressed you can't get out of bed. You're so depressed you can't brush your teeth. And it's okay to be in that place, but you can just use a little mouthwash instead.
Totally. And honestly, when I was in graduate school, one of the best exercises we ever did was when we were all little baby therapists and we were so scared of the part where you're now you've learned all the theory and you have to go therapize someone. But in front of us, we're all going to watch you and we're going to role play, which I hate role playing personally.
Oh my God, I can't do it.
I just hate it. I hate it. Maybe once in a while I do it with my own clients, but very rarely because I genuinely hate it myself. And so I don't think that's fair to do it to people. But the professor said, okay, here's what we're going to do. You're all going to take turns and you're going to be a therapist with each other. But what you're going to do is say the worst possible thing you could say as a therapist. And I think that's the idea of be a terrible therapist,
That's actually really amazing. I love that.
It was the best. So I guess go make a terrible podcast and then maybe it won't be so scary after you do a terrible episode.
Yeah. Start recording and just say hey, I'm the biggest idiot in the world and I'm here to bring you an interview that you're going to hate. That's unbelievably good advice. Oh my God.
Right. I had a client years ago who was in fashion and who was creative and was really struggling sometimes with getting designs started. And I shared that with them, that story. And I said, so I guess my advice for you, if we put it in your industry, is make the ugliest dress you could possibly make. Just make, or whatever you're making, dress, top, swimsuit, whatever. Just let it be disgusting. And honestly, they were that was so helpful. And now when I get stuck, I let myself make the most horrendous, ugly garment I could make. I
feel like at a certain point, you kind of start to take a little joy in it and just doing a terrible job. It's, for my own personal background, I used to be a podcast booking agent, still do that kind of work sometimes, but I've sort of pivoted. And that kind of direct sales, not just direct sales, but repetitive, thumping repetition of just reaching out to people over and over again, saying hey, do you want this thing that I'm offering you? Hey, do you want this thing that I'm offering you? Over and over again. Eventually you kind of get to treasure being a little bit of a bull in a china shop, where people respond to you and they go, oh, well, when you reach out to people, that's not really how you do it. And you go, so are you going to give me the answer that I want or what? And it just gets to be a little funny after a while. And I think that's in the same spirit. You get to sort of take a little bloody-minded joy in doing the worst possible job.
And it gets easier, right?
Absolutely.
We get, in clinical terms, we call it desensitized. sometimes you just do the scary thing or the hard thing, and then just the more you do it, the more your brain learns it's not terrible.
Mm.
And then eventually your brain is like, okay,
Yeah, eat
I
that
got
frog.
it. Yeah, exactly, right?
I mean, the fun thing about podcasts is as a micro influencer, odds are pretty good that like your audience, strangely, it's sort of a running joke that like your friends aren't going to listen to this.
Mhm.
So the people that you're like really afraid of judging you are probably not going to be in your audience. It's going to be people halfway around the world who are really interested in actually hearing what you have to say. So, take a dive.
Totally. And I guess if we want to continue on this theme of like, be a bad podcaster, say the worst thing a therapist can say, make the ugly dress. I guess if you're like really nervous and you want to dive into the deep end of the pool, like maybe send an episode to like your mom, or your friend that you think is going to judge you, or someone at work. And, you don't have to do it, but that's maybe something to think about if it sort of rips the Band-Aid off. I know a lot of professionals I've seen who are entrepreneurs. It's almost like they're ashamed of like their creative endeavor or like this other thing that they're pursuing. Yeah.
It's so heartbreaking.
Yeah. So it's then what do we do? It's like, well, I like put myself out there, but also like kind of also not, because I am afraid the metaphorical like mom, coworker, like the person in my office, my judgmental friend is gonna hear it or see it. And sometimes just like, again, I guess facing your fear and being desensitized to it can help sort of take that away. And I guess if they don't like it, maybe that says something about your friends.
Yeah.
Or maybe just don't share it with them ever again, and you don't have to, and that's fine.
That's super good advice. I mean, I feel like I have to ask now, what's the worst piece of advice that you have?
What is the worst piece of advice that I have?
Can I also just say I love this as a bit? I just want to be like every single person that I talk to now, I think I might ask them what their worst piece of advice is.
You go for it. Steal it. I love it.
Yes, I'm faking that.
I think mine's going to be like so boring that I think my worst piece of advice would be like, just like stop trying. Give up.
Although to be honest, I think that's actually might be a really good piece of advice.
There you go. That's very...
Giving up can be a very powerful thing. That's like, I think sometimes the biggest breakthroughs in people's lives happen, I think, when they just say, screw it. Like I give up. I'm not gonna, like, whatever the like great American novel that you've been just ripping your hair out for the last 10 years and you've written 4 pages of, and you feel like a real failure over, just give up. And just say, like, I'm just going to do something else.
It's true. So, and that's true. And actually, sometimes I do that with my own clients. And usually what happens is like, no, you can't give up, right? And all of a sudden they're so motivated. So I guess my terrible advice is terrible. I give terrible advice.
Damn, you're really bad.
So bad at giving bad advice.
I mean, my terrible advice for podcasters is don't do it consistently.
Well, yeah, I think that's good bad advice. But even then, I don't know. I guess we never know. Maybe there's a way to recover from that.
Or, a very good one that everyone's going to hear me I should probably just set it as like a background chant of my voice whispering very quietly, saying, don't set up a smart link. Because if you are listening to this and you have a podcast and you don't set up a smart link, I'm going to find you.
So, okay, the takeaway so far is set up a smart link and be consistent.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. There you go. Everything else, those are the things that matter.
Everything else is a little superfluous. And I say that in a joking way, but it's kind of true. Like your content, nobody in this world is as unique as they think they are. Your content is not going to be like, it's not going to be pure gold. Never is. That's kind of how all creative endeavors are. Like anybody can say anybody can do what you're doing. Anybody can, it's everything's like pretty replicable. Anything that you can do, somebody else can do. That's sort of the human condition. But anybody can have an idea. Ideas are worthless. The real the real thing of any success is being consistent and doing the work. And consistency in podcasting is absolutely paramount, because eventually, like, if you are putting out the content that you're passionate about consistently, eventually someone will find it and they'll connect, and you will find the right people eventually. But if you're not doing it consistently, then no one's going to find you, and except for me. And it's never going to work out.
Yeah, and I think it maybe harkens back to what we were saying a few minutes ago, that like sometimes it's totally fine to be a C student, right? If consistency is more important, if you have to choose between like doing something good enough or doing it not at all, do it good enough.
Yeah. Oh my God, 10,000%. Like that editing cut that you've been agonizing over, that you've been completely that editing cut that you've been completely agonizing over, put it out in a crummy state. Or if it's if it's completely unacceptable to you, in keeping with Nikolai's very good advice, give up. Like, if that episode that you're like, oh, it's almost there and I can't do it, just throw it away. If it's bad, just throw it away. It's fine. Everything's okay.
Totally. And like, give up, and maybe also don't give up overall, right? Like, you can give up on a project, you can give up on a task, and that doesn't mean like you give up on everything.
Absolutely.
And I guess that comes back to like, it's okay to fail, and you're not a failure if you give up. Like, to fail on a project is not the same as like, I have failed, I am a failure.
Right. I mean, I think that just as a species, I think we have a very weird view about failure, where like we think that it exists. And like, if you're not fired, if you didn't lose your job over it, and you're not dead, then like, you haven't failed. Fine. Everything's okay.
Yeah, like look at cheetahs, if we want to use a metaphor. It's like, how many times do they chase something and not catch it? I bet a bunch.
Yeah.
Right? Watch a nature documentary. I'm sure they know this, how many times do they try and how many times do they succeed. Probably a ratio there.
Yeah, exactly. And they're still kicking. And
they're not like over there coming to see me in the therapy office like, I chased that gazelle and it got away. I don't know if cheetahs eat gazelles, so I think they do. But like, and then what does that say about me? It's like, no, they just go chase another gazelle maybe 20 minutes later, an hour later.
Yeah, it's fine. Like, they're not failures. It's okay. I mean, I think that coming back to that, I love that this is becoming a theme now. Just a very profound advice that you should give up is part of giving up effectively, I think, is a matter of like knowing where your energy is best spent and understanding that there's really no such thing as fail. Because, I can't tell you how many creative endeavors I've started and then said, this is really not a good idea. Like, I don't have the energy to see this through to fruition. I'm just kind of spinning my wheels and making myself feel bad. So I'm not going to do it anymore. And then the thing that I've been working on finds life in a new creative project that actually does go somewhere and that I do wind up treasuring. Like, everything you do kind of winds up staying in the vault anyway. And you can reuse it. Like, it's all effective. It's all useful.
Yeah. And I think I encourage my clients all the time to just use that effectiveness question. Like, if you're really struggling with something, literally just asking yourself, is this effective? Sometimes that question is enough to help give you the answer. And if the answer is no, then just like stop doing it.
Yeah, do a different thing. It's fine.
And if the answer is yes, well then like push through, problem solve, figure out what you need to do to like kind of get around the barrier, but like that question will help guide you, because being effective just means being aware of what your bigger picture goals are. But sometimes when we're in the weeds, we lose sight of that. We just get caught up in the momentum or caught up in like the struggle of it, and we can't see clearly.
A really great framing that I've personally used before is just to kind of, when you're finding yourself in the weeds like that, is to just come back to your values and just say like, what do I value about the thing that I'm doing? And is it adhering to those values? And if the answer is no, then you've kind of got two choices to make. Do you stop doing it, or do you refocus?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's sort of a guiding light for really any endeavor at all. Like if you're burning out in your podcast, like is it, and you started your podcast in order to just have fun talking to people about movies, about whatever, or to bring your expertise to people who were going to hear it, perhaps as if you're an entrepreneur, perhaps you're using it as a lead gen or something like that. Is it doing those things for you? And if the answer is no, how do you make it do, how do you make it do those things for you? You can use that to realign yourself pretty effectively, I think.
Absolutely. I talk to people a lot about values as well. And the fact of the matter is, we just feel best when we're aligned with our values,
Mhm.
right? So being aware of what your values are, and then when you're feeling stuck, exactly what you're saying, is this in line with my values? If it's not, do I need to drop what I'm doing, or do I need to rethink it to reconnect it with what those values are?
Absolutely.
And I work with entrepreneurs and small business owners who basically want to be successful, but want to have balance, and they don't want to just burn themselves out in the process. They want to be able to have success without killing themselves, basically, in the process by running themselves into the ground.
That's amazing. How does one get into that? How did you decide like burnout was the thing?
I think I came to it kind of organically. Part of it was I felt like I did everything right and got the job that was going to be like the perfect fit for me, and realized it was not, and started feeling burnt out. And in my journey to try and figure that out and reflect on what really mattered to me, I started by going through a year-long yoga teacher training program. I became a yoga teacher because I knew I really wanted to do work with people. I liked working with people and doing work that I felt like mattered. I was in an office in institutional advancement, which is basically fundraising, asking
Mm.
people for money. So I liked the part where I got to hang out and meet the people and get to know them, but asking people for money all day was not my jam. And especially when you're not super, it was a fine organization, but they had a lot of money already. So,
Mhm.
it wasn't something that really filled my cup. And so I became a yoga teacher to just have something to do to start helping people. And I made a decision that I was going to make a complete career change. And I quit my job and I went back to grad school and I became a therapist. And I just really hit it hard to become a therapist as quickly as possible. And then I think all of that experience kind of came together eventually, where being a therapist who has the skills to help people manage their feelings, their behavior, their mindset, and then my own personal experience of going through that whole career journey,
Yeah, absolutely.
it just like made sense to do burnout work with people, and integrate all of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a, I guess the word I'm looking for is a relevant thing anyway. Like we live in a world that burns people out. Like
Mhm.
that's just sort of the human condition right now. And I've seen plenty of like hopeful rumblings toward a lower hour work week,
Mhm.
toward all these lower hour 4-day work week, that sort of thing. But man, I don't know when relief is coming on the horizon for people, how we're gonna like fix that in sort of a more general sense.
Yeah, and I hope we get there, honestly. I think we're at this interesting place where I guess one of the upsides of COVID, if you want to say everything has pros and cons, is it kind of forced employers to realize that a lot of times people can be more autonomous than maybe employers have always given people credit for. And so there's a lot of push and pull, I think. And you have the organizations that want to just go back to the way things were and want to micromanage people and have them in the office. And
Yeah, I have to say it warms my black heart whenever I see newspaper articles about like or read people talking online about how, oh, my company mandated return to work and nobody at the company came in, and most of their department quit. It just makes me feel a little good inside.
yeah, and I think, that's part of the reason why I do the work that I do is I think if we're going to shift the bigger paradigm, there's obviously like systemic changes that need to happen And I think like we all as individuals need to also take a look at like our behaviors, our beliefs, and figure out like where we do have power, what we can do to just not necessarily subscribe to that belief system that even if we don't believe it, like we've grown up in that our whole lives. So sometimes
Sure, it's the water we swim
permeates.
in.
Exactly. And we don't always realize how much it is influencing us.
Yeah, it's there perhaps was a point where this hopefully people don't hear it and sneer at me, but it's the sort of attitude I'm talking about where we sort of subscribe to this idea that like people have to be working and producing and productive. Don't have a hobby unless it's making you try to turn your hobbies into side hustles kinds of thing. And perhaps at one point I really feel like perhaps at one point that was true during a period where people were pretty concerned about like storing enough food to survive the winter. But nowadays, do we really need to like sneer at people who advocate for a 4-day weekday or advocate for a 4-day workday when their work is coming in and sending accounts receivable emails all day? Like we're not exactly making the wheels of industry turn.
And I would, counter argue that. I had a client that I used to coach with a couple years ago, and one time she came in and she said, you know what I learned? So if this is wrong, you can talk to her about it, but it makes sense to me.
What's her at?
Right? I'll tell y'all how to find her. But she said, I learned that cheetahs actually only are like run and use their energy 60%. No, cheetahs rest 60% of the time. That was it. And she said, isn't that interesting? So most of the time, this is like the fastest animal. I don't know if it actually is the fastest animal.
Fastest land animal.
Yes. So when people think of speed and power, like a lot of times they think of a cheetah, and yet they rest. That is technically most of the time.
Yeah.
But when they use their energy, they like hit it hard, as we would say maybe here in like colloquial language. So I don't know, is it really like what is productivity? Like to me, that could be productivity is like all of that resting. So you have the energy to then like really push when you need to push. Like maybe that resting is productive.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think that we need to as a species have a little bit more respect for the concept of rest and the concept of like doing nothing and not being productive and just allowing ourselves the space to do that.
I don't even say anything about it. I'm like, yes.
Preach.
Nikolai,
thank you so much for joining me today. This was an amazing conversation. Do you have any pluggables to plug?
Yeah, so I will say I every month do a completely free self-care challenge, which is just evidence-based behavioral sort of strategies to help you just find balance and not burn yourself out. And because I work with burnt out people, I always make sure I keep them to under 10 minutes, but I share a little bit of why it actually works so you actually want to do it and give a tip to help you just take care of yourself so that you can continue to succeed sustainably. And if you want to sign up for those, they go straight to your inbox around the 15th of the month. Like I said, they're short. I don't send a ton of emails because I don't want to burn myself out by sending a million emails. And that's on my website, which is OMpowermentpsych.com. It's the word empowerment, but with an O, like OMpowermentpsych.com. So that's OMPOWERMENT. Psych, PSYCH.com.
Amazing. And I'll make sure that we put that in our show notes as well.
I had to make my name so cute. Like, it sounds so cute. It looks great on my website.
It doesn't punish by saying it.
Yeah, the logo looks real cute. People tell me they love it, but when you have to, like, spell it over the phone when someone has to email you something, it's not. It was a challenging decision, let me tell you. I look back on it. I'm like, why did I do that?
No, I feel ridiculous when I say our website out loud, which is letschatpodcasting.com, ING. just because I always have to be sure there's that little ing at the end, and it doesn't always quite read when you sing.
I get it. So you get it.
All right. Well, thank you again, Nikolai.